Taney has said, I am a member of the Caretaking Council, and in the last long while now, we've been together as a Sangha. We've been sustaining many rich conversations about, clarifying for ourselves and for one another what earth-holding work means, what earth justice means for each one of us, and the aspirations that have brought us, each of us, to step forward and be part of this community and be part of this work of being and acting in the world in our own unique ways. But there are many shared aspirations, definitely, that have brought us together. And so when I began preparing for today's presentation, I was really reminded of the many stories, many experiences that have shaped who I am and that have brought me on this path to be with this path that most of us here share, has brought me to Thai and brought me to the practices and to the teachings. And some of that I'll be sharing with you today. And so I'm aware that most of us who join these calls are calling in, most of us are calling in from the US. Some, like me, are calling in from Canada. Sometimes friends from across Europe are here. And so as I step forward today as a Filipina in this virtual space, but also thinking of myself as a Filipina living here in a settler colonial society, it's my intention, my wish that hopefully the stories that I can offer, the many experiences that I can offer here from the Global South, could enrich our collective understanding of earth justice from here in the Global North. I've entitled today's presentation Hinga, and in the Filipino language, that word means rest. Hinga means rest. But if you parse the word apart, pa and hinga, it literally means to let breathe. So I thought that was such a beautiful way to signal in our language that perhaps we have an understanding that resting and breathing actually happens together and get experienced together. So back in 2019, so I'm a PhD student now at York University. And back in 2019, I had the chance to conduct some field work back in the Philippines to learn more from grassroots women leaders who are leading their own disaster response efforts. And my team and so I brought together two friends who are filmmakers, and I hope they get a chance to watch this recording, Relin and Grace, two friends who I brought along in my travels. And the three of us traveled to 3 different villages to learn from the women there. And throughout these trips, I was conversing with many people, some living in rural communities, farmers and fishers. Some are in the city. And I've also been in touch with many lifelong social workers and activists, people who are my parents' age and even older, who've been doing this work for decades, right? Long before I was born. And learning from their experiences of what it has been like to be doing frontline response work, every time a disaster happens, all sorts of experiences. And I remember being struck by one conversation in particular, and it was with an older person. So I call her Tita, which is auntie in Filipino. So Tita and I had a very long conversation, and we were musing, sort of out loud together on the state of affairs in the country, with climate change intensifying, weather conditions across the archipelago, but there were also events that are political in nature that are endangering many different people from across civil society. And she was telling me that she's seen it all. Events that we might call natural, in terms of when we think of the weather. So whether it's typhoons that come in every year, or floods and the earthquakes. But there are also other types of disasters that hardly make it to the news, right? And these were the slow types of violence that are experienced in the everyday. And they could take the form of, for instance, informal settlers being evicted from their houses, in the cities, or we have smallholder farmers who've lost all their crops from a flash flood, and now they're plunged deeper into debt. And there are small-scale fishers who are also losing their catch from more commercial types of fishing. And so these types of everyday suffering, in our tradition we might say suffering, and for them it's these are types of violences that are experienced in their daily lives that are hardly acknowledged, hardly covered in the media, hardly talked about, and they're not thought of as emergencies, right? And so what does one do when we're aware of all of these things that are happening all simultaneously? And for some of you who might be a bit more familiar with the political context now in the Philippines, there's also increasing attacks on civil society, on journalists and social workers and activists. And so as frontline responders, they're not just dealing with the violence from, so-called natural phenomena, but they're also being endangered by other kinds of violence. And so Tita and I were speaking for hours, and she very spontaneously just shared this, and I transcribed these words from her. But it showed me how important it is how important pahinga is, to rest and to be able to breathe again. So allow me to read her words out here. And so she said, hindi naman siguro bawal mapagod, ang lahat napapagod. She says, maybe it's not wrong to be tired. Everybody gets tired. And she says, hindi naman siguro bawal malungkot, ang lahat nalulungkot. Maybe it's not wrong to feel sorrow. Everybody feels sorrow. Pero ang pag-asa hindi tayo pwede mawalan. But hope, this we cannot lose. Kailangan lang siguro ng pahinga para makapag-recharge tayo. She says, maybe we just need rest, to let breathe so we can recharge ourselves. So that's the inspiration for today's offering. In 2013, some of you may know the strongest storm in the planet's recorded history, Super Typhoon Haiyan, came through the Philippine Islands. And since then, it's 7, almost 8 years now, there have been many more super typhoons, rivaling in intensity, that have come through. So back then I joined many countless other local volunteers, aid and humanitarian workers in providing emergency relief. And also, of course, international agencies, aid organizations, the media, all parachuted in. Everybody was there. It was an extremely difficult time. There were logistical challenges in even just knowing how to get to islands that are separated by waters, towns that were really difficult to reach because of the roads being blocked by debris. There was this catastrophic lack of coordination among all of these different entities working on the ground. And when I left this work to begin graduate studies in Canada, it was the distance. It was being so far away from ground zero, from from being so far from home, which actually allowed me to see things a little differently, and also to grieve, really grieve the disasters that have actually, in fact, not yet stopped. They come in these, I think about them as like these waves that keep coming in, and they devastate the same marginalized communities that have barely begun to get back on their feet, and then something comes in again. And what is also often not understood or not acknowledged is the toll that is building up on the bodies of so many frontline responders, right? And who to this day are endangered by all types of violent forces. And so it became so clear to me in these past many years that we have all been literally running out of breath. So it was in the midst of this time that I came running, really running to Thai's teachings and to practice and to Sangha. And it was in the midst of all this deep yearning to find something that would sustain my own life force. And those I worked with and cared deeply about. And I felt completely, and I know I share this love with many of you here, I felt completely in love with reading Thai's books, his journals, Sister Chang Kong's autobiography, because they were telling me about work that they've been doing in Vietnam decades. This is what amazes me. Is this is work they were doing decades before I was even born. But somehow, somewhere, in the core of my being, I knew firsthand that these are experiences I shared, that I knew, that I completely understood, and that they are still the same realities that are being presently experienced today in my country. And so I knew that I was not romanticizing these, these heroic stories from the war, but that they are that they're real. They're real experiences for me. And I know that it's the same reality for so many across the global South today, and for so many of our racialized and marginalized communities here in the North, that there really is no sense of a post-disaster, because we're still living amidst so many of these disasters. And that's why I take courage in sharing this here in the Sangha, because I've shared my stories in many other spaces, but I know in Sangha, I'm held by this common love and deep understanding of what our lineage has to offer in light of these difficulties today. So it's been a year since the pandemic was declared and of life in lockdown. And when I was preparing for this offering, I was inspired to revisit, to open my hard drive disk, where a lot of the footage that we filmed in our fieldwork are stored. And I said, there must be a lot here that I haven't been reminded of, and that we haven't used in our own, in our own research, and that maybe something could be inspiring for us today. So I remember when we were traveling, I invited my friends Relin and Grace to help me do research differently. And I said, I used to be in these communities as an emergency worker, where I was rushing around and running and living off a perpetual adrenaline rush. And it was difficult to really tune into and really arrive and understand what people's lives are like, because there was no time to do that at that time. But many years later, when I was visiting the country again, and with the help, of course, of our practice, I said, I'd like to really arrive in each of these villages that we were visiting And if you could help me, because they're professional filmmakers, and I said, if you could help me with your cameras to just tune into the slower rhythms of their daily lives, and that maybe I could understand their realities a little differently. And so I've put together it's an artistic experiment, but if I put together a 10-minute video, which I wanted to share with everyone today, and it's a contemplative practice of, there are no words, no dialogue, no subtitles. It's just images and some music, some sounds from the different scenes. And the intention is for us together to really be able to witness and maybe even experience and get a little taste of what daily lives are like, so that we may see how disasters continue to actually shape people's everyday realities. But also, it's not enough. Suffering is not enough, right? It's not the only story to tell, but that in their everyday, we could see real practices of resting, of caring for one another, of restoring, and maybe some healing too is happening. And so I invite us to do that as we experience the video. And all of us here in this call have, of course, our mindfulness practices to draw from, which is wonderful. So there's not, I wouldn't need to explain how to do contemplative practice with this audience today. So I'll leave it to you to experience this in your own way, following your breathing, and really being fully present in your body, so that the mind could quiet down, and we may be able to touch something differently, hopefully. And so what I'll do is I'll share my screen now. And to start, I'll invite the sound of the bell. And what might be helpful too is sometimes the video lags when we're doing screen shares. So I'll post the link of the video here. And if that happens for you, you could also watch the video yourself on your own screen. We'll do that together. So I'll just click share screen now. And if you could just make sure the video is maximized, so you get a full view. And we'll listen to one sound of the bell to start. Thank you, dear Sangha, for your presence. So as we move into our Dharma sharing session, I do have a few questions that might help our collective reflections, and I can post them in the chat. One would be to think about what I sensed and felt in my body as I was contemplating the video. What signs of lingering disasters and suffering did I observe? And also, what signs of resting, caring, and healing did I observe? And how might slowing down and breathing mindfully help me see things differently?